What happens when My Hero Academia joins the Justice League, but finds themselves in the brutal world of the boys? Deku, Bakugo, Todoroki, and All Might arrive expecting to meet fellow heroes, only to discover a world where superheroes are controlled by corporations, and the line between hero and villain has completely disappeared. With Vought watching their every move, and Homelander seeing them as a threat, the new Justice League must prove what true heroes are really supposed to be. So sit tight, get comfortable, and let's get into the story. The transition from the world of pro-heroes to the gray, smog-choked reality of Manhattan didn't happen with a heroic fanfare. There was no orchestral swell, only the sickening, high-pitched whine of a quirk singularity event collapsing in on itself. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was reaching through a swirling vortex of blue energy toward the fading light of UA High. The next, he was slamming into the asphalt of 7th Avenue, the air tasting of diesel, stale coffee, and something metallic, the unmistakable scent of fresh blood. He rolled, his costume tattered, the green sparks of One for All flickering out like a dying bulb. Beside him, Bakugo snarled as he hit the ground, palms already smoking, while Todoroki slid to a halt on a self-generated patch of frost that hissed as it met the heat of the New York summer. All Might, in his gaunt, skeletal form, crumpled into a heap, his deep-set eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on terror. They weren't alone. 50 feet away, the world of the boys was performing its daily ritual of casual atrocity. A-Train, the fastest man in the world and a premier member of the Seven, had just resolved a high-speed pursuit. A hijacked armored car sat crumpled against a bus stop, but the vehicle wasn't the problem. A-Train stood in the center of the intersection, his blue and white suit splattered with a fine, misty crimson. He was laughing, checking his pulse on a high-tech watch, completely oblivious to the fact that he had run through a pedestrian to stop the van. The victim wasn't even a body anymore. They were a red smear across 20 yards of pavement and the shattered glass of a nearby Starbucks. To the people of this world, it was a tragedy to be litigated. To Class 1A, it was a villainous act beyond comprehension. "Help, someone," a faint voice groaned. A woman was pinned under the rear tire of the bus that had swerved to avoid A-Train's sonic boom. The bus was tilting, its frame groaning as the weight of the passengers shifted. Deku didn't think. He didn't wait for a PR team or a legal clearance. He moved. Green lightning arced across his skin as he used 5% of his power to leap across the wreckage. He landed beside the bus, his hands gripping the undercarriage. "Everyone, get back!" He screamed, his voice cracking with the desperation of a boy who truly believed that a hero's job was to save people. "Who the hell are these kids?" A-Train muttered, his laughter dying as he adjusted his goggles. He looked at the cameras, not the eyes of the citizens, but the floating Vought drones and the smartphones of the crowd. This wasn't in the script. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. The bus groaned. Deku's muscles surged, the veins in his arms standing out like corded rope. He wasn't just lifting a vehicle. He was fighting the physics of a universe that didn't want to be saved. Beside him, Shoto Todoroki stepped forward, his right side erupting in a wave of ice that formed a literal pillar beneath the bus, stabilizing it. Bakugo, usually the first to blast his way into a fight, stood frozen for a split second, his eyes locked on the red smear A-Train had left behind. "Hey, Sparky!" Bakugo roared, pointing a gauntleted hand at the speedster. "You just killed someone! What the hell are you laughing at?" A-Train blinked, a confused, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. "It was an accident, kid. Collateral damage. I was stopping a felony. Who are you supposed to be? Some Godolkin University dropouts? Where's your handler?" "Handler?" All Might wheezed, pushing himself up. He looked at A-Train, the cape, the suit, the polished corporate logo, and then he looked at the smear on the road. The former symbol of peace saw something he had never encountered in all his years fighting All for One. A man with the power of a god and the soul of a middle manager. There was no malice in A-Train's eyes, only an immense, terrifying boredom. Before the confrontation could escalate, the sky darkened. The sound of a sonic boom, deeper and more authoritative than A-Train's, shook the windows of the surrounding skyscrapers. A streak of red, white, and gold descended from the clouds, landing with a practiced, graceful thud in the center of the chaos. Homelander. He stood there, his American flag cape fluttering in the wind he had created. He looked perfect. His blonde hair was coiffed to a shimmer. His blue eyes beamed with a simulated warmth that made Deku's skin crawl. It was the same feeling he got from Shigaraki, the feeling of a predator pretending to be a person. Homelander looked at the bus, now safely balanced on Todoroki's ice, and then at the four strangers in their colorful, childish costumes. "Wow," Homelander said, his voice a rich, honeyed baritone that projected to the back of the crowd. "Look at this, real initiative. You boys okay? You look like you've had a long flight." He stepped toward Deku, his hand reaching out for a fatherly pat on the shoulder. Deku flinched. The danger sense quirk, the fourth user's legacy, wasn't just tingling, it was screaming. It was a rhythmic, pounding alarm in the back of his skull. Every fiber of his being told him that the man in front of him was a bomb waiting to go off. We're heroes," Deku managed to say, his grip tightening on his suit. "We're from UA." Homelander's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered to the Vought drones overhead. He knew every Supe in the continental United States. He knew the roster of every B team in the Vought archives. These kids didn't exist, and yet they had just performed a feat of strength and elemental manipulation that looked clean. It didn't look like the messy, drug-fueled power of a typical Supe. It looked like something from a comic book. It was a threat to his brand. UA? Never heard of it. Is that in Ohio? Homelander chuckled, turning to the cameras. Well, New York. It looks like we have some new friends. And since they seem so intent on doing things the right way, I think Vought might have a place for them. He leaned in closer to Deku, his voice dropping to a whisper that didn't reach the microphones. "Don't ever touch a bus in my city again without a permit, kid. I'll laser your fucking eyes out." Within minutes, the perimeter was swarmed. Not by ambulances or police, but by Vought international tactical teams. They didn't treat the situation like a rescue, they treated it like a corporate acquisition. Black SUVs idled as men in tactical gear with Vought patches began ushering the Justice League, a term a junior PR executive back at the tower had just frantically trademarked after seeing the heroic silhouettes of the newcomers, into the vehicles. "Wait!" Deku cried, looking back at the woman they had saved. She was being loaded onto a stretcher, but the EMTs weren't talking to her. They were talking to a Vought lawyer who was handing her a non-disclosure agreement before she even had an IV in her arm. "Is she going to be okay? We need to go with her." "She's in great hands, son," a voice said. A woman with a sharp bob and a frantic, twitchy energy stepped out of the lead SUV. Ashley Barrett, VP of Hero Management, looked like she was on the verge of a stroke. She was staring at Todoroki's ice, then at Bakugo's explosions, and finally at All Might. "You four are the biggest thing to happen to this company since we found a Nazi in a nursing home. You're coming with us. We have contracts to sign, costumes to fix, and a whole lot of Justice League merchandise to ship by Monday." As the door of the SUV slammed shut, Deku looked through the tinted glass. He saw A-Train laughing with a cameraman, posing for a selfie near the spot where a human being had been liquidated. He saw Homelander hovering above the city, basking in the applause of a crowd that didn't realize they were cheering for their own executioner. The Justice League had arrived in the boys' universe. They had come to save the world, but as the car sped toward the looming monolith of Vought Tower, Izuku Midoriya realized with a sinking horror that in this world, the heroes were the ones you needed saving from. The interior of Vought Tower was a cathedral of glass, chrome, and calculated intimidation. For Izuku Midoriya, who had grown up admiring the bright, hopeful hallways of UA High, the executive levels of the 99th floor felt like a tomb. It was too quiet, the air scrubbed of any scent other than expensive floor wax and the faint, ozone tang of high-end air purifiers. They hadn't been taken to a hospital or a debriefing room. They had been taken to a laboratory disguised as a luxury suite, and then, after hours of blood draws and invasive scans that left even Bakugo uncharacteristically quiet, they were ushered into a boardroom that overlooked the sprawling, uncaring expanse of Manhattan. Stan Edgar, the CEO of Vought International, sat at the head of a mahogany table that looked like it cost more than a year of pro-hero insurance. He didn't wear a costume, he didn't have a cape, he wore a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, and his eyes, cold, dark, and utterly devoid of the frantic energy that defined Ashley Barrett, remained fixed on a digital tablet. Beside him stood Madeline Stillwell, her professional smile as sharp and synthetic as a blade. "No compound V," Edgar said, his voice a calm, resonant bass that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the boys sitting across from him. He didn't look up. No trace of the serum in the blood. No history of prenatal administration. No records in any of our global laboratories. And yet, we have a boy who can generate localized climate shifts, another who produces nitroglycerin-like sweat, and a third who, well, the physics of your one-for-all are still being debated by our R&D department. They're currently calling it biological energy storage, which sounds significantly more expensive to insure than a standard soups. "We're not soups," All Might said, his voice thin, but carrying the ghost of his former authority. He sat in a plush leather chair, his oversized yellow suit hanging off his skeletal frame. "We are pro-heroes. We were born with these abilities, quirks. We have licenses. We follow a code of ethics sanctioned by the government." Edgar finally looked up. He didn't look impressed. He looked like a man watching a dog try to explain the tax code. The government? In this country, the government is a client. Vought is the provider. And as for your licenses, they are as valid in this reality as a child's drawing of a dollar bill. You are, for all intents and purposes, illegal aliens, unregistered weapons, corporate espionage suspects. "Listen here, you old fossil." Bakugo slammed his palms onto the table, a small, warning pop of an explosion scorching the wood. "We don't care about your corporate bullshit. We want to know how to get back, and we want to know why that blue-suited freak ran through a civilian like she was a traffic cone." Stillwell flinched at the explosion, her hand moving toward a panic button beneath the table, but Edgar didn't move. He simply stared at the scorch mark on the mahogany, then at Bakugo. "That table cost $40,000, Mr. Bakugo. If you do that again, I will have the cost deducted from your mother's estate, provided we can find a version of her in this universe to sue." Bakugo's eyes widened, his hands trembling with a rage that found no purchase in Edgar's coldness. "Mr. Edgar," Deku interrupted, his voice shaking but determined. He leaned forward, his green eyes scanning the room, subconsciously looking for an exit, a weakness, a hero. "We saw what happened on the street. People were hurt. That man, A-Train, he didn't even look back. He was laughing. We don't want your money. We want to help. We want to be the heroes this city clearly needs." Edgar leaned back, a small, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. "Heroism. It's a lovely sentiment, isn't it? Very Saturday morning. Very 1950s. The problem, Mr. Midoriya, is that heroism is a product. And right now, the Seven are a product that is currently suffering from a slight perception issue. People are starting to find Homelander a bit too distant, a bit too godlike. They want something grounded, something wholesome. They want the Justice League." "The Justice League?" Todoroki asked, his voice flat. "That sounds like a brand name." "It is," Stillwell chirped, stepping forward with a stack of thick, glossy folders. "Vought acquired the trademark 40 years ago from a defunct comic book publisher. We've been waiting for the right team to fill the slots. A group of young, diverse, natural heroes who haven't been corrupted by let's call it the celebrity lifestyle of the Seven. You four, plus a few other students our teams are currently recovering from the crash site, will be the face of Vought's new global outreach division." She slid a contract across the table toward All Might. It was 300 pages long. "You sign this, and you get the best medical care in the world for your condition. Your students get the best training, the best costumes, and a direct line to the best legal defense team on the planet. Most importantly, Vought will dedicate its entire resource pool to finding a way to get you home. If you don't sign, well, the Department of Defense is very curious about natural superhumans. I imagine the vivisection labs at Sage Grove would be significantly less comfortable than the penthouse we've prepared for you." All Might looked at the contract, then at his students. He saw Deku's idealism warring with his fear. He saw Bakugo's caged fury and Todoroki's icy detachment. He knew what leverage meant, even in another world. "You're not asking us to be heroes," All Might whispered, his eyes narrowing. "You're asking us to be mascots." "I'm asking you to be an asset," Edgar corrected. "Because in this world, an asset lives. A hero usually ends up as a tragic headline and a tax write-off. Look at the monitors, gentlemen. On the wall, a massive screen flickered to life. It showed the seven: Homelander, Queen Maeve, Black Noir, the Deep, A-Train, Translucent, and the new girl, Starlight. They were posing for a Vought News Network special. They looked magnificent, radiant, and utterly fake. But then the feed changed. It showed raw, unedited footage from Vaught's internal servers. It showed A-Train snorting a translucent white powder in a locker room. It showed the Deep harassing a female staffer. It showed Homelander standing alone in a hallway, his eyes glowing red as he stared at a wall with a look of such profound, quiet hatred that Deku felt his breath catch. "The Seven are the premier team," Edgar said, his voice dropping an octave. "But they are difficult, unstable. You four represent a clean slate. You are the Justice League. You will be the symbols of peace that All Might here so clearly values. You will save cats from trees, you will visit hospitals, and you will never, ever mention Compound V, A-Train's speed habit, or the fact that this world is a meat grinder. You play the part, and we keep you safe. We might even help you find your way back to your UA." Deku looked at the Justice League logo on the folder, a sleek, shielded Joe and Lel in gold and blue. It looked heroic. It looked like everything he had ever dreamed of. But as he looked back at Stan Edgar, he realized that the man wasn't offering them a job. He was offering them a cage. "What if we refuse?" Todoroki asked. Edgar stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Then you are just 4 more pieces of collateral damage in a city that has seen far worse. We'll have the cleanup crews out before you hit the pavement. Think about it. You have until tomorrow morning. The penthouse is on the 80th floor. There's a full buffet. Don't leave the building. The security systems are enthusiastic." As Edgar and Stillwell swept out of the room, the doors locking with a heavy electronic thud, silence descended on the boys. "They're villains," Bakugo spat. But he didn't move toward the door. He knew he couldn't blast through 3 feet of reinforced Vought steel without bringing the whole floor down. "That suit-wearing bastard is a villain." "No," All Might said, his voice sounding older than ever as he stared out at the New York skyline, where the neon lights of Vought advertisements drowned out the stars. "He's something much worse, young Bakugo. He's a businessman." Deku walked to the window, his hand pressing against the cold glass. Down below, he saw a giant digital billboard of Homelander winking at the crowd, the words "Save the Day" scrolling in bright, patriotic colors. For the first time in his life, the sight of a smiling hero didn't make Izuku Midoriya feel safe. It made him feel like he was being watched by a monster. He didn't know it yet, but in a small, damp basement across town, a man named Billy Butcher was looking at a grainy photo of a boy in a green suit lifting a bus, and Butcher was already planning how to break him. The 80th floor penthouse was a masterpiece of corporate hospitality and psychological warfare. Every surface was either marble, velvet, or gold-leafed, designed to make the occupant feel like a god, while subtly reminding them that every crumb of this luxury was provided by Vought International. For Izuku Midoriya, the splendor was nauseating. He sat on the edge of a bed that cost more than his mother's apartment in Musutafu, his notebook open on his lap. He wasn't writing about hero strategies or quirk evolutions. He was trying to map out the power structure of the Seven based on the 30 minutes of interaction they'd had. "They aren't a team," Deku whispered, his pen scratching frantically against the paper. "Homelander is the center. A train is afraid of him. The woman in the armor, Maeve, she's grieving? No, she's exhausted. And the man in the shadows, Black Noir, danger sense doesn't even trigger for him. It's like he's not even a person." "Stop mumbling, nerd," Bakugo snapped from the far side of the suite. He was currently testing the limits of the reinforced windows by pressing a smoking palm against the glass. "We're trapped in a giant birdcage built by a guy in a suit who isn't even a soupe. I should blast through the floor and see how far down this Justice League bullshit goes." "And then what, young Bakugo?" All Might's voice was a dry rasp from the kitchen island, where he was staring at a bowl of fruit, as if it were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "We are in a world that does not recognize our laws, our customs, or our history. If we fight now, we are not heroes. We are the super terrorists they keep mentioning on the news. We must be patient. We must observe." "Observe what?" Todoroki asked, leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on the door. "The way they cover up murders? The way they treat us like livestock? I've seen this before." My father built his career on branding and rankings, but even Endeavor didn't have a legal team dedicated to making sure his collateral damage signed non-disclosure agreements. The door to the suite hissed open, and 4 men in tactical gear stepped in, followed by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept since the Clinton administration. Ashley Barrett was clutching a clipboard as if it were a life preserver. "Okay, Justice League, big day, huge day," she shrieked, her voice an octave higher than it had been yesterday. "We've got your new suits. Corporate decided the UA costumes were too anime. We need something more patriotic, more legacy. We've also scheduled your first power assessment in Training Room 4B. The 7 will be observing. No pressure, just the future of the company's stock price on your shoulders. The 7 will be there." Deku stood up, his heart hammering. "Oh, just Homelander, Maeve, and A-Train," Ashley said, waving a hand dismissively while her other hand reflexively tugged at a patch of her own hair. "They want to see what natural talent looks like. Homelander is very curious. He loves new things. For about 5 minutes. So, make them count." Training Room 4B was less of a gym and more of a stadium. The walls were lined with high-speed cameras, and the floor was composed of a self-repairing synthetic polymer designed to withstand soup-level impacts. In the observation booth, behind 3 inches of ballistic glass, sat the gods of this world. Homelander lounged in a high-backed chair, his cape draped over the side, a carton of milk in his hand. Queen Maeve stood behind him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of bored indifference. A-Train was leaning against the console, his eyes hidden behind his goggles, his leg bouncing with the frantic energy of a V-addict. "All right, kids," Homelander's voice boomed through the intercom, sounding disturbingly cheerful. "Show us what you've got. We've seen the bus lift. Very impressive, kid. Very classic. But Vought wants to see the justice in the league. Let's start with the one who likes to blow things up. Bakugo, right? Give us a max output demonstration." Bakugo stepped into the center of the room. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked directly at the observation booth. He hated the way Homelander looked at him, like he was a particularly interesting bug. "You want a show, you blonde freak?" Bakugo snarled. He took a wide stance, his palms turning a deep, angry orange. He didn't just let out a blast. He channeled the frustration of being kidnapped, the horror of seeing A-Train's victim, and his own bruised ego into a single point. Howitzer impact. The explosion was deafening. A massive sphere of fire and concussive force filled the room, the shockwave rattling the ballistic glass of the observation booth. The heat was so intense, it triggered the room's fire suppression system instantly, filling the air with a fine mist of chemical retardant. In the booth, Homelander didn't blink. He watched the flames die down, his expression unreadable. Internal combustion. Biological nitroglycerin. No compound V. Interesting. He turned to A-Train. "He's faster than he looks, isn't he?" "He's a punk," A-Train muttered, though his grip on the console tightened. Next was Todoroki. He didn't move from his spot, but with a simple flick of his wrist, he encased half the stadium-sized room in a jagged glacier of ice, then immediately melted it with a localized heat wave from his left side. The transition was so seamless, so controlled, that even Maeve's eyebrows shot up. "Dual affinity," she whispered. "He's not just a soup, he's a precision tool." Finally, it was Deku's turn. He stepped forward, his new Vought-designed suit, a sleek, armored version of his original, now adorned with gold accents and a Justice League crest, feeling heavy on his shoulders. "Mr. Midoriya," Homelander's voice came over the speaker, and this time, the warmth was gone. It was cold. "We've seen your strength, but I noticed something yesterday. You flinched when I got close. You've got some kind of sense, don't you? A little birdie told me you were looking for danger. Well, kid, let's test those reflexes." Before Deku could respond, the far wall of the training room opened, and a series of high-velocity projectile launchers emerged. These weren't training bots. They were military-grade hardware, the kind Vought sold to the Pentagon. "Go on," Homelander urged. "Be a hero," the launchers fired. Not rubber bullets, but jagged, tungsten-tipped flechettes. Deku's danger sense exploded in his skull, a cacophony of warnings that felt like needles in his brain. He moved in a blur of green lightning, one for all, full cowling at 8%. He caught the first 2 flechettes mid-air, spun, and kicked a third into the wall. But they didn't stop. The rate of fire increased. Deku realized with a jolt of horror that Homelander wasn't testing his powers. He was trying to see how much damage he could take before he broke. One flechette grazed Deku's shoulder, tearing through the Vought-Tech fabric and drawing blood. Another sliced his cheek. "Deku!" Bakugo shouted, moving to intervene, but a hidden turret in the ceiling swiveled and fired a high-pressure sonic blast that sent the explosive hero reeling back. "This is an individual assessment," Ashley's voice shrieked over the intercom. "Interference will result in contract termination." Deku was gasping, his vision tunneling. He saw the next volley, 20 flechettes, all aimed at his vitals. He prepared to push one for all to 20%, even if it tore his ligaments. He wouldn't die in a corporate gym. Suddenly, a flash of starlight filled the room. The flechettes were vaporized midair by a concentrated burst of bioluminescent energy. The room went silent. Standing near the entrance was Starlight, Annie January. She was trembling, her hands still glowing with the remnants of the blast. She looked up at the observation booth, her eyes defiant. "That's enough," she yelled. "He's just a kid. This isn't a test, it's an execution." In the booth, Homelander stood up slowly. He looked at Annie, then at Deku, who was bleeding and panting on the floor. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "You're right, Annie," Homelander said, his voice echoing with a mock gentleness that made Deku's skin crawl. "He is just a kid. A very special, very talented kid. I think we're going to be great friends. All of us." As the lights in the training room dimmed, Annie rushed over to Deku, helping him up. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her eyes darting toward the cameras. Deku looked at her, seeing the same exhaustion and hidden fear he'd seen in Queen Maeve, but underneath it, there was a spark of something else, something real. "Why did you help me?" Deku asked, wiping blood from his lip. "Because," Annie said, her voice barely audible, "someone in this building has to actually be a hero." Deku looked up at the glass booth. Homelander was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. He looked at his notebook, lying forgotten on the floor. He didn't need to take notes anymore. He knew what the Seven were. They weren't just villains, they were a virus. And he was starting to realize that to save this world, he might have to do something much harder than being a hero. He might have to become a revolutionary. The aftermath of the power assessment left the penthouse feeling less like a luxury suite and more like a pressurized chamber. Starlight had been whisked away by a panicked Ashley Barrett, likely to be lectured on team cohesion and the legal ramifications of unauthorized energy discharge. Meanwhile, a team of Vought medics, men who looked more like crime scene cleaners than doctors, had patched Deku's wounds with a specialized synthetic skin graft that smelled faintly of vanilla and chemicals. They didn't ask if he was in pain, they only asked if the scarring would be visible for tomorrow's promotional photo shoot. It was nearly midnight when the air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound, but a shift in barometric pressure that made Todoroki stand up from his meditation and caused Bakugo's hands to spark instinctively. All Might, resting in a recliner, sat upright, his gaunt face hardening. The balcony doors, locked by a centralized security override, slid open with a whisper. Homelander stepped inside. He wasn't wearing his cape. He was in his basic tactical suit, his boots making no sound on the plush velvet carpet. He looked around the room with the casual curiosity of a landlord checking on a problematic tenant. He didn't look angry about the incident in the training room. He looked bored, which was significantly more dangerous. "You know," Homelander said, his voice a soft, intimate purr. He walked over to the kitchen island and picked up a green apple, turning it over in his gloved hand. "I've seen a lot of things. I've seen people who can fly, people who can melt steel with their breath, people who can talk to fish, though we don't talk about that one in public. But I've never seen anyone do what you did today, Izuku." Deku stood his ground, though his danger sense was currently vibrating at a frequency that made his teeth ache. "You tried to kill me," Homelander laughed, a short, genuine bark of amusement. He took a bite of the apple, the crunch echoing in the silent room. "Kill you? Kid? If I wanted to kill you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Your head would be a decorative ornament on the Chrysler building. No, I was calibrating. Vought likes their data points, and I like to know what's under the hood of the car before I take it for a drive." He moved, and even with the enhanced speed of One for All, Deku barely saw him blur. Suddenly, Homelander was inches away, his face leaning down, his blue eyes searching Deku's. He wasn't looking for a weapon. He was looking for the one thing he demanded from everyone: fear. He wanted to see that familiar, shivering submission that made him feel like the center of the universe. But he didn't find it. Deku was terrified, yes. His heart was a drum in his chest, and his sweat was cold. But his eyes weren't those of a victim. They were the eyes of a student of heroism. He was analyzing Homelander's posture, the micro-tremors in his jaw, the way his pupils dilated. Deku wasn't seeing a god. He was seeing a case study. What? Homelander's smile twitched. No, please don't hurt me. No, I'll do whatever you want. You're a strange little bird. I was looking at your heart rate, Deku said softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. It's elevated, not from the flight, from frustration? You're lonely, aren't you? The silence that followed was absolute. Bakugo looked like he was about to launch himself across the room, his eyes wide at Deku's suicidal honesty. All Might gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Homelander's expression didn't change, but his eyes glowed a faint, ominous red. The temperature in the room seemed to spike. He reached out, his hand wrapping around Deku's throat, not crushing it, but holding it with the delicate, terrifying pressure of a man who could turn a diamond to dust. What did you just say to me? Homelander whispered. I've met people like you, Deku managed to choke out, his hands coming up to grip Homelander's wrist, not to pull it away, but to steady himself. People with immense power, who were never taught how to be human. You have everything, but you don't have anyone who can tell you no. That's why you're so angry. That's why you hurt people. You're trying to find a limit that doesn't exist. Homelander's grip tightened. For a second, the red in his eyes flared into twin beams of heat that singed the air. He looked ready to erase Deku from existence, but then, the red faded. He let go, stepping back, a look of profound, genuine confusion crossing his face. No one had ever spoken to him like that. They either worshipped him, hated him, or plotted against him. No one had ever looked at him with pity. You're a toy, Homelander finally said, his voice flat. That's all you are. Vought's new shiny toy. They call you the Justice League, because it sounds noble. It sounds like something people can trust. But do you know what justice means in this tower, Izuku? It means whatever Stan Edgar says it means on a quarterly earnings call. He turned toward the balcony, his cape, which he had apparently left on the railing, snapping into his hand as if by magic. Enjoy the penthouse while it lasts. Tomorrow, you're going on your first mission. A little PR cleanup in the Bronx. Some terrorist cell Vought found. Try not to get blood on your new suit. It's a bitch to clean, and Ashley will cry, and then I'll have to listen to her cry, and that makes me cranky. He stepped off the balcony, vanishing into the night without a sound. Deku, you absolute moron! Bakugo erupted, the silence breaking as he stormed over. You almost got your head fried. What were you thinking, psychoanalyzing that lunatic? I wasn't analyzing him, Deku said, sinking onto the sofa, his legs finally giving out. I was trying to find the person inside the suit, but there's nothing there, Kachan. It's just an empty room with a bomb in it. He is a tragedy, All Might whispered, staring at the empty balcony. A child raised in a laboratory, given the power of a god and the moral guidance of a corporation. He is the ultimate failure of our profession. But he is right about one thing. Tomorrow is a mission, and if Vought is involved, it won't be about saving people. The mission was revealed the next morning via a Vought News Network, VNN, briefing. A group of super terrorists, the corporate term for any non-Vought soup, or anyone standing in the way of a pharmaceutical merger, had reportedly taken over a chemical plant in the Bronx. The 7 were unavailable due to a scheduling conflict, which Deku suspected was actually a high-profile yacht party, so the Justice League would make their grand debut. It's simple, Madeline Stillwell told them as they were ushered into a Vought Vatal transport. We've leaked your arrival to the press. There will be drones everywhere. You go in, you use your colorful powers to neutralize the threat, and you make sure to stand in front of the Vought logo on the storage tanks for the final shot. Minimal casualties is the goal, but the narrative is the priority. 10 quote. As the VTOL rose over the city, Deku looked down at his hands. He was wearing the Justice League gloves, blue with gold trim. They were reinforced, high-tech, and beautiful. But as he looked at Todoroki, whose face was set in a grim mask, and Bakugo, who was checking his gauntlets with a savage intensity, Deku realized they weren't being sent to save the Bronx. They were being sent to audition for the role of Vought's next generation of executioners. And somewhere in the city, hidden in a derelict basement filled with photos of Homelander and files on Compound V, Billy Butcher watched the VNN breaking news alert. He took a long drag of a cigarette and looked at Huey, who was nervously cleaning a sniper rifle. "Look at him, Huey," Butcher growled, pointing at the screen showing Deku's hopeful face. "The Justice League. Fresh off the boat and ready to lick the boot. It's time we showed the little cunts what happens when you play dress-up in the wrong fucking universe." The chemical plant in the Bronx was a skeletal maze of rusted pipes and hissing steam vents, illuminated by the harsh, flickering neon of a Vought International billboard that loomed over the facility like a watchful eye. To the public watching the VNN livestream, this was a high-stakes counter-terrorism operation. To Izuku Midoriya, it was a crime scene before the crime had even been committed. As the VTOL's bay doors hissed open, the first thing Deku heard wasn't the sound of gunfire or shouting. It was the persistent, hornet-like hum of 24 Vought media drones circling the perimeter, their gimbal-mounted cameras twitching to capture his heroic landing. "Remember the brief?" Ashley's voice crackled through the earpieces, sounding as if she were vibrating out of her skin. "Deku, give us a big, hopeful landing. Bakugo, keep the explosions bright but not too smoky. The cameras can't see the logos through the soot. And for the love of God, don't let the terrorists talk into the microphones." "Terrorists," Todoroki muttered, his feet hitting the metal catwalk with a dull thud. He looked down into the courtyard. A group of about 20 men and women were huddled near a pressurized tank of Compound V precursors. They weren't wearing tactical gear or carrying high-tech weaponry. They were wearing tattered factory uniforms and holding rusted pipes and a few scavenged handguns. They looked terrified, their eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and chemical exposure. "They aren't terrorists," Deku whispered, his danger sense flickering Dige, but not with the sharp, jagged warning of an incoming attack. It was a low, mournful thrum. The danger wasn't coming from the people below, it was coming from the situation itself. They're just workers, protesters. Vought says they're insurgents. A-Train's voice cut through the air. The speedster appeared in a blur of blue, leaning casually against a steam pipe, a branded energy drink in his hand. He wasn't supposed to be on the mission, but Vought had sent him as a special guest consultant to ensure the Justice League didn't go off script. And in this zip code, what Vought says is the gospel. Now, are you kids gonna do your jobs, or do I have to show you how a real soupe clears a room? "Shut up, you oversized blue bottle," Bakugo barked, his palms crackling with orange sparks. He looked at the group below, his eyes narrowing. Even Bakugo, for all his bluster, could tell the difference between a villain like Muscular and a guy holding a wrench in a desperate attempt to keep his pension. "We do this our way, no one gets hurt. Plus ultra, right?" A-Train smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Good luck with that." The Justice League moved. Todoroki slid down a ramp of ice, creating a glittering barrier between the workers and the Vought tactical teams that were closing in. Bakugo used small, controlled blasts to propel himself into the rafters, creating a series of blinding light flashes that disoriented the armed guards without causing injury. Deku landed in the center of the courtyard, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please!" Deku shouted over the roar of the drones. "Put down your weapons! We're here to help! We can talk about this!" The leader of the group, a man with a scarred face and a Vought-branded prosthetic arm, looked at Deku with a mixture of hope and utter, soul-crushing cynicism. "Help? You're wearing their logo, kid. You're just the new flavor of the month." "They're closing this plant and dumping the runoff into the local water supply. We're just trying to keep our kids from getting sick. We'll fix it," Deku promised, stepping forward. "We'll speak to the board. Time's up," A-Train's voice boomed. In a heartbeat, the atmosphere of the mission shattered. A-Train didn't move like a hero. He moved like a force of nature with a grudge. He didn't use the catwalks or the stairs. He became a blue blur that tore through the courtyard at Mach 1. He didn't target the weapons. He targeted the optics. As he passed the leader of the protesters, the sheer concussive force of his wake sent the man spinning through the air. A-Train didn't stop. He looped around, his elbow connecting with the side of a woman's head as he snatched a handgun from her grip. To the drones, it looked like a blur of heroic speed. To Deku, who saw the world in slow motion as One for All surged through his nerves, it was a calculated, casual slaughter. The leader hit a steel support beam with a sickening crack. He didn't get up. "What are you doing?" Deku screamed, launching himself at A-Train. He intercepted the speedster near the chemical tanks, his hand gripping A-Train's shoulder. "He wasn't a threat. You're hurting them." A train skidded to a halt, his eyes wide behind his goggles. He looked at Deku's hand, then at the drones hovering overhead. "Get off me, kid. You're ruining the shot. Vought needs a decisive victory. If we don't end this with some bodies on the ground, the shareholders think we're soft. People aren't numbers." Deku roared, his power jumping from 5% to 15%. The air around him began to crackle. "Stop this, or I will stop you." Bakugo dropped from the rafters, landing between A-Train and the remaining protesters. "I've been waiting for an excuse to blast that smug look off your face, Sparky." A-Train's jaw tightened. He looked at the cameras, then at the two boys, who were genuinely prepared to fight a member of the Seven to protect a group of nobodies. For a second, A-Train looked genuinely annoyed, not scared, just inconvenienced. "You guys really don't get it, do you? You're not in a comic book. You're in a contract." Suddenly, a high-pitched whistle cut through the air. From the shadows of a nearby warehouse, a small silver canister skittered across the floor, emitting a thick, acrid cloud of purple smoke. "Gas," Todoroki warned, creating a wall of wind to push the cloud back, but the smoke didn't behave like normal gas. It was heavy, clinging to the floor and the drones, shorting out their electronics. One by one, the Vought drones spiraled out of control and crashed into the concrete. "Vaught's blind," a gravelly, cockney voice whispered from the darkness. Before A-Train could react, a heavy caliber round slammed into his shoulder. It didn't penetrate his skin, his super durability was too high, but the sheer kinetic force sent him stumbling back. "Who's there?" A-Train shouted, his eyes darting toward the shadows. "I'll kill you! I'll run through your fucking heart!" "Big talk for a druggie who can't even keep his heart rate under 200, the voice replied. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was wearing a heavy trench coat, his face a rugged map of scars and unrelenting spite. He held a massive, custom-built rifle, and beside him stood a younger man with messy hair and a look of profound terror. Billy Butcher looked at Deku, then at the Justice League logo on his chest. He spat on the floor. "Well, look at this," Butcher growled, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "The Justice League. You lot look like you fell out of a bowl of Lucky Charms. I'm Butcher, and I think it's time we had a little chat about who you're actually working for." "Stay back," Deku warned, his danger sense screaming. This man wasn't a Supe, but the malice radiating off him was more intense than anything he'd felt from A-Train. "We're heroes. We're here to handle this." "Heroes?" Butcher laughed, a dry, hollow sound. He gestured to the fallen leader of the protesters, whose body lay twisted and broken against the steel beam. "That hero over there, the one in the blue suit you were just cuddling with, he just killed that man for a tax break, and you're wearing his company's colors. That doesn't make you a hero, son. That makes you a mascot for a murderer." "We didn't know!" Deku cried. "Then you're either stupid or complicit," Butcher said, stepping closer. "Vought set this up. There are no terrorists, just poor bastards who wouldn't sell their land. Vought called in the Justice League to give the public a show, and they sent A-Train to make sure the villains didn't survive to testify in court." It's a classic. Page 1 of the Vought playbook. A-Train snarled, his body tensing for a sprint. "I'm gonna turn you into a red smear, you fucking..." Butcher didn't flinch. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, glowing green vial. "Go on then, A-Train. Have a go. But I've got enough Temp V in my system to see you coming, and enough C4 wired to this chemical tank to take out half the Bronx. You want to be the reason Vaught's stock price hits 0 tonight? Be my guest." The silence that followed was heavy with the scent of ozone and betrayal. Deku looked at the protesters, then at A-Train, who was looking at the C4 with a mix of rage and genuine corporate fear. Finally, Deku looked at Butcher. He realized that in this world, there were no clear lines. The heroes were villains, the terrorists were victims, and the man trying to stop the madness was a monster in his own right. "Help them," Deku said to Todoroki and Bakugo, his voice low and hard. "Get the workers out of here, now." "And what about you, nerd?" Bakugo asked. "I'm going to find out the truth," Deku said, looking Butcher in the eye, "even if I have to go through everyone in this city to find it." The tension in the chemical plant was thick enough to choke on, a volatile mix of ozone from Deku's lightning and the sharp, metallic tang of A-Train's suppressed rage. Billy Butcher stood in the center of it all, looking like a man who had walked through hell and found the temperature agreeable. He didn't look at the Justice League with awe. He looked at them like a mechanic examining a particularly shiny, but ultimately useless, piece of chrome. "Tick-tock A-Train," Shage phased, Butcher said, his thumb hovering over the detonator. "I've got a half-dozen cameras in the rafters that aren't Vought proprietary. You kill me, the footage of you braining that poor sod against the steel beam goes live on every server from here to Moscow. Even Vought's legal team can't scrub the whole internet in 5 minutes." A-Train's leg was twitching, a side effect of the compound V vibrating in his veins, demanding he move, demanding he kill. "You're a dead man, Butcher. You and the little pipsqueak." "Maybe," Butcher shrugged, his eyes never leaving A-Train. "But I'll be a dead man who ruined your career. Now, run along. Go tell Mummy Stillwell you lost the toys." A-Train looked at Deku, then at Bakugo and Todoroki. He saw the ice wall, the scorched earth, and the genuine, unyielding resolve in their eyes. He realized he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and, for the first time in a long time, unprotected by the corporate umbrella. With a snarl that sounded like a wounded animal, he vanished in a sonic boom that shattered the remaining windows in the courtyard, leaving only a trail of blue light and the stench of burnt rubber. "Right," Butcher said, turning to Deku. He tucked the detonator into his pocket and spat on the ground. "Hughie, get the van. Frenchie, Kimiko, secure the perimeter. We've got company that needs an education." From the shadows, a wiry man with a frantic expression and a silent, terrifying woman with blood-stained knuckles emerged. The woman, Kimiko, stared at Deku with a strange, haunting intensity. She didn't see a hero. She saw another experiment in a different suit. "We're not going anywhere with you," Bakugo said, stepping forward, his palms smoking. "You're a criminal. You just threatened to blow up a city block." "I threatened to blow up a Vought-owned death trap," Butcher corrected. He walked right up to Bakugo, ignoring the explosions dancing on the boy's skin. "And if I hadn't, that blue-suited junkie would have finished what he started with these people. You want to be a hero, Sparky? Start by recognizing when you're being used as a fucking PR shield." Deku looked at the protesters. Todoroki was already helping the injured leader, using his left side to provide gentle warmth to the man's shock-chilled body. The workers looked at the Justice League with fear, but they looked at Butcher with a grim, desperate kind of respect. "Kachan, Todoroki, go with the workers," Deku said, his voice quiet but firm. "Make sure they get to a hospital that isn't owned by Vought. Use your quirks to keep the police away if you have to." "Deku, you can't be serious," Todoroki warned. "This man is dangerous. So is the building we've been sleeping in," Deku replied. He looked at Butcher. "I want to see what you have to show me." The safe house was a damp, subterranean basement beneath a defunct electronics repair shop in Queens. It was the polar opposite of Vought Tower. There were no marble floors or gold-leafed ceilings. The walls were covered in grainy, black-and-white photographs, police reports, and complex webs of red string connecting Vought executives to unsolved disappearances. The air smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and the quiet, simmering desperation of men who had lost everything. Huey Campbell, the younger man from the plant, sat at a desk cluttered with monitors. He looked at Deku with a sympathy that felt more authentic than anything Deku had encountered in this world. "I was like you," Huey said softly. "I grew up with A-Train posters on my wall. I thought the 7 were gods. Then, A-Train ran through my girlfriend while I was holding her hand. He didn't even stop to see if she was alive. He just kept running." Deku felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He thought of the woman under the bus on his first day, and the man at the chemical plant. They don't care at all, do they? To them, we're just background actors in their movie," Butcher said, throwing a thick file onto the table in front of Deku. "Vought doesn't create heroes, kid. They create products. They take babies, inject them with a chemical called compound V, and hope they grow up to be profitable. If they grow up to be rapists, murderers, or psychopaths, Vought just hires a better PR firm." Deku opened the file. It wasn't full of heroic feats. It was a catalog of horrors. There were photos of collateral damage from Homelander's rescues, people bisected by heat vision, crushed by falling debris, or simply disappeared when they saw something they shouldn't have. He saw the report on Flight 37, A hijacked plane Homelander and Maeve had left to crash because it was cleaner for the narrative than a messy rescue. 123 people dead, all covered up as a terrorist attack that Vought used to push for soups in the military. "This can't be real," Deku whispered, his hands trembling. "No one could be this monstrous." "Homelander is the worst of the lot," Butcher said, leaning over the table, his face inches from Deku's. "He's a lab-grown god, with the emotional maturity of a toddler and the ego of a dictator. And right now, he's your boss. He's the one who decided you and your little Justice League were the perfect way to distract the public from his latest body count." "What do you want from me?" Deku asked, looking up. "I want an inside man," Butcher growled. "Vought thinks you're their new golden goose. They're going to give you access to the tower, the labs, the schedules. You find out where they're keeping the V. You find out what they're planning for those other kids they snatched from your UA. And when the time comes, you help me put a bullet in the head of every one of those caped cunts." "I won't kill," Deku said, one for all flickering around his fists. "We're heroes. We save people. In this world, son, saving people usually means killing the monster that's eating them," Butcher countered. "You think you can plus ultra your way through a man who can laser a crowd of thousands without blinking? You think your quirks are enough to change a system that owns the government, the media, and the soul of this country?" "We have to try," Deku insisted. "If we become like you, if we just become more killers, then what's the point? We're just another faction in a war." Butcher looked at Deku for a long moment, then glanced at Huey. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that." Reminds me of Huey before the world kicked him in the bollocks. "Fine. You don't want to kill? Then be the whistle. You get us the evidence to burn Vought to the ground legally, and I'll hold off on the C4. For now." The silence was broken by the chirping of Deku's Vought-issued hero comm. It was a message from Ashley, marked Urgent Level 1. "Where are you? Homelander is asking for you. The promotional event at Vought Square starts in 2 hours. If you are not here, there will be legal and physical consequences." "He's calling for his toy," Butcher whispered. "You go back. You play the part. You smile for the cameras and you wear the blue and gold. But every time you look at Homelander, you remember Flight 37. You remember the man at the plant. And you remember that we're watching." As Deku climbed out of the basement, the neon lights of the city felt colder than they ever had. He was going back to the belly of the beast, not as a hero, but as a spy. He was Izuku Midoriya, the boy who wanted to be the next All Might. But as he looked at the Vought Tower looming in the distance, he realized that in this universe, being a hero didn't mean winning a fight. It meant surviving the corruption. Returning to Vought Tower felt like stepping back into a beautiful gilded lung that was slowly exhaling poison. The transition from the damp, revolutionary grit of Butcher's basement to the 99th floor's pristine marble was jarring enough to make Deku's head spin. He met Bakugo and Todoroki in the hallway just outside the Justice League quarters. They were already dressed in their updated costumes, vibrant, high-contrast versions of their original gear, now festooned with Vought-branded utility belts and subtle American flag motifs integrated into the piping. "The workers got to a clinic in Hell's Kitchen," Todoroki whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the HEVAC system. "The boys' contacts met us, but Vought's cleaners were already at the plant by the time we left. They're scrubbing the site. By tomorrow, it'll be an environmental restoration project." "And the leader? The man with the arm?" Deku asked. "Dead," Bakugo spat, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He was staring at his own reflection in the polished elevator doors, loathing the wholesome hero staring back. Vought News is saying he was a radicalized insurgent who succumbed to unstable makeshift weaponry. They're blaming the smoke we saw on his own dirty bomb. Deku's stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. He thought of the man's hopeful eyes when he first landed. He was a man who just wanted his children to have clean water, and now he was a footnote in a corporate PR strategy. Before Deku could respond, the elevator doors slid open to reveal Ashley Barrett, her hands trembling so violently that her tablet was rattling against her jewelry. "There you are! You're late! You're catastrophically late!" she shrieked, ushering them toward the hair and makeup suite. "Homelander is already at Vought Square. The crowd is at 80,000. The stock is up 2 points on the anticipation of the Justice League debut. If you three don't look like the second coming of Christ in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to jump off this building, and I'm taking your contracts with me." As the boys were pushed into chairs and subjected to the aggressive attentions of Vaught's image enhancement team, they didn't notice All Might, Yagi Toshinori, quietly slipping out of the medical wing 3 floors below. All Might was a shadow of his former self, a skeletal man in an oversized suit, but his mind was still that of a master strategist. He had seen the way the Vought doctors looked at his blood samples, not with the curiosity of healers, but with the greed of prospectors finding a new vein of gold. While the Justice League was being prepared for their public execution by branding, All Might followed a lead he'd overheard in the lab, a shipment manifest for Subject V0, destined for a facility called Sage Grove. He moved through the service corridors, his height and gauntness allowing him to blend into the shadows of the maintenance staff. He found a terminal in a secluded security hub and, using a bypass code he'd seen a technician use earlier, he began to dig. He didn't find hero rosters. He found pharmaceutical ledgers. He found Project Chrysalis. He found the truth. In this world, heroes weren't born. They weren't the next step in human evolution. They were a line item in a budget. He saw the photos of infants in sterile cribs, their tiny veins glowing with a sickly blue light as Compound V was pumped into their systems. He saw the failure rate charts, children who had exploded, melted, or mutated into mindless horrors because their bodies couldn't handle the serum. Vought wasn't a school for heroes. It was a factory for gods, and the quirks of this world were nothing more than a patented chemical reaction. "My God," All Might whispered, his hand shaking as he scrolled through the images. "It's not a gift. It's a curse they sell by the bottle." While All Might was witnessing the birth of the nightmare, the Justice League was being thrust into the heart of it. Vought Square was a sea of screaming fans, flashing lights, and Justice League merchandise that had been manufactured in sweatshops before the boys had even landed in this dimension. The stage was a massive, high-tech platform flanked by 200-foot digital screens. In the center stood Homelander, his cape catching the stage lights, his smile so perfect it looked like it had been carved from porcelain. Beside him stood Queen Maeve, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on Earth, and Starlight, who caught Deku's eye with a look of profound, silent apology. And now, Homelander's voice boomed, amplified by a sound system that shook the very pavement. "New York, America, the world, please welcome the future of heroism, the boys who prove that justice knows no borders, the Justice League." The roar of the crowd was deafening. Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki stepped into the light. The danger sense in Deku's mind was no longer a tingle. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. He looked out at the thousands of faces, families, children in Deku masks, teenagers holding Bakugo signs. They looked so happy. They looked so safe. And they had no idea they were cheering for a brand built on a mountain of corpses. Homelander draped a heavy, fatherly arm around Deku's shoulders. The grip was tight, a reminder of the power simmering just beneath the surface. "Look at them, Izuku," Homelander whispered, his voice a warm, terrifying breath in Deku's ear. "They love you, and all you have to do to keep that love is say the words. Tell them how Vought saved you. Tell them how proud you are to be part of the family." The microphone was thrust into Deku's hand. He looked up at the giant screen, seeing his own face magnified 1,000 times. He saw the Justice League logo on his chest. He thought of Butcher in the basement. He thought of the man in the chemical plant. He thought of the babies in the Vought labs. He looked at the crowd, and for a second, the mask of the good student almost held. But then he saw a little boy in the front row, sitting on his father's shoulders, wearing a cheap, plastic cape. The boy was looking at Deku with the same pure, unadulterated hope that Deku had once felt looking at All Might. Deku started, his voice cracking. "We were brought here to be heroes." He felt Homelander's grip tighten, the fingers digging into his trapezius muscle with enough force to bruise. "But being a hero isn't about the suit," Deku continued, his voice gaining strength, echoing across the square. "It's not about the logo, it's about the truth. And the truth is, we don't belong here. None of this is what it seems." The crowd's cheering faltered, a confused murmur rippling through the sea of people. In the wings, Ashley Barrett began to physically pull her own hair out. "Cut the mic! Cut the feed!" she screamed. But the technicians were frozen, staring at the screen. Homelander's smile didn't move, but his eyes turned into cold, blue chips of ice. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, lethal frequency. Finish the script, kid, right now. Or I'll start with the boy in the front row and I won't stop until this whole square is a red lake. You think you're a hero? Prove it. Save them from me. Deku looked at the boy in the plastic cape. He looked at the laser-red heat beginning to glow in Homelander's pupils. He realized that the truth Butcher wanted him to tell was a weapon that would kill everyone in sight. The truth is, Deku said, his heart breaking as he forced the lie through his teeth, that Vought is the only reason we're alive. They are the true symbols of peace. The crowd erupted again, the tension breaking into a renewed frenzy of worship. Homelander patted Deku's cheek, a condescending, mocking gesture. Good boy, he whispered. But as Deku stepped back, he caught Bakugo's gaze. Bakugo wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Homelander with a murderous, focused clarity. And Todoroki's left side was beginning to steam, a localized mist rising from his shoulder. They had survived the stage. They had played the part. No, as they walked off, Deku knew the Justice League was over. They weren't Vought's assets anymore. They were a ticking time bomb, and the countdown had just hit 0. The fallout from the Vought Square event was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. By the next morning, every VNN affiliate was running a loop of Deku's heartfelt endorsement, edited to remove the hesitation, the cracking voice, and the look of sheer terror in his eyes. He was the Green Guardian, Bakugo was the explosive Avenger, and Todoroki was the Elemental Prince. The Justice League was no longer just a team. They were a lifestyle brand. They had their own flavor of Turbo Rush energy drink, their own line of natural hero yoga mats, and a scheduled appearance on the 7-on-7 with Cameron Coleman. But inside the tower, the mask was disintegrating. Bakugo sat in the tactical ready room, staring at a new piece of equipment Vought's tech team had forced on him, a pair of enhanced gauntlets. They looked like his original grenade bracers, but were inlaid with Vought proprietary sensors that would track his kill-to-collateral ratio in real time. They're trying to turn my sweat into a data point, Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, vibrating hum of fury. He wasn't yelling anymore. He had moved past shouting and into a cold, lethal state of clarity. We have to play along, Kachan, Deku whispered, leaning against the lockers. His own suit felt like a shroud. All Might is still looking for the other students. If we blow our cover now, Vought will move them to a black site we'll never find. We're the only leverage they have. Leverage? Bakugo stood up, the floor beneath his boots cracking slightly. We're the help, Deku. We're the cleanup crew. And today, they want us to prove we can finish the job. The mission was a high-value target extraction in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Vought intelligence, which usually meant Ashley Barrett screaming at a map, had identified a group of soup extremists who had escaped from an undisclosed medical facility. In reality, these were escapees from Sage Grove, the horrific testing ground where Vought experimented on adults to see if they could survive Compound V. The 7 weren't coming. Instead, Vought had sent their most efficient silencer, Black Noir. The silent ninja stood at the edge of the Vital's ramp as it hovered over a cluster of dilapidated cabins. He didn't speak, didn't breathe audibly, and didn't offer a tactical briefing. He simply pointed toward the ground and leaped into the darkness. Great, Bakugo muttered, his palms smoking. The mime is in charge. The Justice League followed. They landed in a clearing where the air was thick with the scent of pine and something else. The ozone and copper smell of raw, untrained power. From the shadows of the cabins, a girl stumbled out. She couldn't have been older than Eri, her skin glowing with a sickly, translucent light. Behind her, a man with skin like molten lead stood protectively, his eyes wide with a mixture of agony and defiance. "Stay back!" the man roared, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "We just want to be left alone. We didn't ask for this. Vought did this to us." The drones, sleek, silent Vought media bots, descended from the canopy, their red recording lights blinking. "Justice League. Target identified." Ashley's voice barked through their earpieces. "The Molten Man is a grade A threat. Bakugo, give the fans a spectacular neutralization. Remember, high impact, maximum visual appeal. Noir will handle the administrative details." Bakugo stepped forward, but he didn't raise his hands. He looked at the man. He saw the surgical scars on the man's neck, the way his power seemed to be eating him from the inside out. This wasn't a villain. This was a victim. "Hey, Leadhead," Bakugo called out, his voice surprisingly calm. Just put your hands up. We can get you out of here. We aren't like the others. The man laughed, a wet, rattling sound. You're wearing the cape, kid. That makes you exactly like the others. Suddenly, Black Noir moved. He didn't use a flashy power or a heroic shout. He was a shadow that detached itself from the trees. In a blur of obsidian tactical gear, Noir was behind the girl. A serrated combat knife appeared in his hand, the steel matte black to avoid reflection. No! Deku screamed, launching himself forward, but Noir was faster. Noir didn't kill the girl. Not yet. He used her as a human shield, his blade pressed against her throat, his eyeless mask fixed on the molten man. It was a cold, calculated move to force a surrender, or to provoke a reaction that would look justifiable on the evening news. Let her go! Bakugo roared, his restraint finally snapping. He didn't aim at the man. He aimed at Noir. I said let her go, you silent freak. Noir didn't move. He simply tightened his grip. The girl let out a small, whimpering cry as a thin line of red appeared on her neck. Noir is acting under VOT Protocol 4. Ashley's voice was hysterical now, screaming in their ears. Bakugo, stand down. He is the senior officer. Just blast the man. Blast the man and we can go home. Bakugo looked at the man, who was now charging in a desperate attempt to save the girl. He looked at the drones, recording every second for a public that would be told these were terrorists. And he looked at Black Noir, the hero who was prepared to slit a child's throat to meet a corporate objective. In that moment, Katsuki Bakugo finally understood the truth about this universe. In his world, villains were people who used their power for selfish ends. In this world, the heroes were the system that manufactured those ends for profit. Plus ultra, Bakugo whispered, the words sounding like a curse. He didn't fire a blast at the man. He turned his palms behind him and ignited a massive, concussive explosion that propelled him toward Black Noir like a missile. He collided with the silent assassin, the sheer force of the impact throwing both of them through the wall of a cabin. Bakugo, Deku cried, using One for All to sweep the girl and the man out of the line of fire. Inside the cabin, it was a brutal, silent war. Black Noir was unlike any villain Bakugo had ever fought. He didn't feel pain, he didn't tire, and he didn't have a soul to appeal to. He was a biological machine. Noir swung a heavy tactical baton, shattering Bakugo's shoulder plating. Bakugo countered with a point-blank explosion to Noir's chest that would have leveled a building. Noir didn't even flinch. He simply lunged forward, his fingers digging into the gaps in Bakugo's armor. "You're not a hero!" Bakugo screamed, his face inches from the black visor. "You're just a fucking dog on a leash." Noir responded by slamming Bakugo's head through the floorboards. As Bakugo struggled to clear his vision, he saw Noir reach for a second blade. A longer, heavier tanto designed for decapitation. Noir wasn't trying to neutralize him. He was trying to retire the asset. But Bakugo wasn't done. He gripped Noir's wrist, the nitroglycerin sweat on his palms reaching critical mass. "You want a show, Vought?" Bakugo snarled, looking directly into a drone that had flown through the shattered window. "Watch this." He didn't use a controlled blast. He unleashed a massive omnidirectional explosion. The AP shot, autocannon, at point-blank range. The cabin disintegrated. The shockwave knocked the drones out of the sky and sent a plume of fire 100 feet into the air. When the smoke cleared, Bakugo was standing in the center of the crater. His suit was shredded, his blood dripping onto the charred wood. Black Noir lay 20 feet away, his suit torn, revealing a glimpse of scarred, graying flesh beneath. Noir struggled to rise, his movements mechanical and jerky, but he was finally, visibly damaged. Todoroki and Deku landed beside Bakugo, their faces grim. The targets, the man and the girl, had vanished into the woods during the chaos. "We're dead," Todoroki said, looking at the downed drones. "Vought will never let this go. We just attacked a member of the Seven on leave to tape." "Good," Bakugo said, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the ground. He looked at the Justice League logo on his chest, and, with one violent motion, he ripped the golden-blue crest off his suit, tossing it into the fire. "I'm done playing dress-up. If they want a villain, I'll show them a real one." Suddenly, the sky above them lit up, not with lightning, but with the terrifying rhythmic thrum of Homelander's flight. The leader of the Seven descended slowly, his cape billowing in the heat of the fire. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, like a father watching his favorite puppy bite the hand that fed it. He looked at the smoking ruin of the cabin, then at the damaged Noir, and finally at Bakugo. "You know," Homelander said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "I really liked those gauntlets. They were very expensive, and I really liked the Justice League brand. It was supposed to be my legacy." He stepped toward Bakugo, his eyes beginning to glow with a faint, murderous red. "But it turns out, you kids aren't assets at all. You're just defects." The air in the Pine Barrens didn't just grow cold, it became stagnant, as if the very atoms were afraid to move in Homelander's presence. He hovered 6 inches off the scorched earth, his American flag cape draped over his shoulders like a shroud. To the world, he was the pinnacle of human achievement. To Izuku Midoriya, standing over a bleeding Bakugo and a defensive Todoroki, Homelander was a void where a soul should have been. The red glow in the Suppe's eyes wasn't just heat, it was the light of an incinerator. "You know what the problem with natural talent is?" Homelander asked, his voice conversational, almost light. He drifted closer, his boots touching the charred grass. "It's undisciplined. It's messy. It thinks it has a choice. Compound V? V is a contract. It's a promise. You get the power, and Vought gets the person. But you three? You think you're here because you're special. You're not. You're just a temporary market correction." "We're not your products!" Deku shouted, green lightning flickering violently across his skin. He pushed One for All to 20%, his ligaments screaming in protest. "And we're not like you! You don't care about people, you just care about being worshipped." Homelander sighed, a sound of genuine, weary disappointment. "Worship is just another word for job security, kid. But I'm bored of the sermon." He moved. Even with danger sense screaming a deafening alarm in his skull, Deku barely saw the blur. Homelander didn't punch. He collided. He slammed into Todoroki, who had barely raised a wall of ice. The glacier, thick enough to stop a tank, shattered like cheap glass. Todoroki was sent flying through the trees, the sound of snapping timber echoing through the clearing. "Todoroki!" Deku yelled, but Homelander was already in front of him. The Suppe grabbed Deku by the front of his Justice League suit, lifting him off the ground with one hand. Homelander's face was inches away, his eyes twin furnaces. "I heard what you said at the square, Izuku, about the truth. About how we don't belong here. It was very brave, very stupid." A massive explosion rocked Homelander's head from the side. Bakugo, his arm hanging at a broken angle but his jaw set in a snarl, had unleashed a point-blank blast. The fire engulfed Homelander's face, the heat melting the gold trim on his suit. But as the smoke cleared, Homelander's head slowly turned toward Bakugo. His hair wasn't even singed. A single drop of soot stained his cheek. He looked at Bakugo with a look of profound, terrifying curiosity. "That actually tickled," Homelander said. He dropped Deku and, in a motion too fast to track, backhanded Bakugo. The sound was like a car wreck. Bakugo spun through the air, his body skipping across the ground like a stone on water, before slamming into the wreckage of the cabin. "Stop it!" Deku roared. He didn't care about the consequences anymore. He didn't care about Butcher's plan, or the Vought contracts. He channeled 45% of One for All into his right leg. St. Louis smash. The kick connected squarely with Homelander's chest. The shockwave leveled the surrounding trees and sent a cloud of dust and snow into the sky. Homelander stumbled back 3 steps, his boots carving deep furrows in the earth. For the first time, the Suppe's expression wasn't one of boredom. It was shock. He looked down at the dent in his breastplate, then up at Deku. You actually hit me," Homelander whispered. His voice was no longer calm. It was trembling with a narcissistic rage that felt like it could tear the world apart. "You little piece of shit," the heat vision erupted. Deku dove, the twin beams of red energy vaporizing the earth where he had stood. The beams didn't stop. Homelander swept them across the clearing like scythes. Trees were instantly turned into torches. The ground turned to glass. Deku felt the searing heat even as he moved, the air itself becoming a weapon. "Is this the hero?" Deku screamed, dodging another volley. "Killing kids in the woods because your ego is bruised?" "I am the hero!" Homelander screamed back, his voice cracking, the sound of a god complex fracturing. He took flight, hovering 50 feet up, his eyes glowing brighter than ever. I'm the only one who can do what I do. I'm the one who saves this miserable, ungrateful planet, and if I have to burn a few defective toys to prove it, then that's just the cost of business." From the shadows of the tree line, a series of high-frequency pulses suddenly hammered the air. A Vought tactical squad, the deep state cleanup crew, emerged from the darkness. But they weren't aiming at the Justice League. They were aiming at everything. "What is this?" Deku gasped, his danger sense going haywire. "Corporate's calling in the insurance." A voice crackled over a loudspeaker from a hovering Vought gunship. It was Stan Edgar's voice, cold and detached. "The Justice League brand has been compromised. Target acquisition. All non-Vought assets. Collateral damage. Authorized." The gunship's miniguns spun up, raining lead into the clearing. They weren't just trying to kill the MHA kids. They were trying to kill the witnesses. "They're cleaning house," Todoroki shouted, stumbling back into the clearing, his left side a roaring inferno to counter the biting cold. He created a massive dome of ice to shield the unconscious Bakugo, the bullets sparking off the surface. Homelander looked at the gunship, his eyes narrowed. "Edgar, what the hell are you doing? I'm still down here." "You're a liability tonight, John," Edgar's voice replied through the ship's speakers. "You let a child kick you. The metrics are unacceptable. We'll tell the world the soup's terrorists took you all out. A tragic loss for America." Homelander's face went pale. The realization that he was just a line on a ledger, that even he could be replaced, was the final blow to his psyche. He let out a primal, agonizing scream and flew straight through the Vought gunship. The massive vessel exploded in a fireball of aviation fuel and twisted metal, raining debris down on the forest. In the chaos, Deku saw a familiar figure standing near the edge of the crater. Billy Butcher was holding a detonator, his face illuminated by the burning wreckage. He wasn't smiling. He looked at the carnage with a grim, hollow satisfaction. "Time to go, kid," Butcher yelled over the roar of the fire. "The boys have the other students. All Might found him in the basement of Sage Grove. We've got a van waiting. But you leave now, or you die with the rest of the garbage." Deku looked at Homelander, who was hovering in the smoke, staring at his hands as if he were seeing them for the first time. The hero of America was a broken machine. Then Deku looked at Bakugo and Todoroki, who were battered and bleeding, but alive. He had come to this world to be a hero. He had wanted to join the Justice League, but as he grabbed Bakugo's arm and signaled to Todoroki, Izuku Midoriya realized that in this world, there was no league. There were only the monsters, and the people brave enough to hunt them. "We're coming," Deku said, his voice hard. As they vanished into the darkness of the woods, leaving the burning forest and a shattered god behind, the first drops of rain began to fall. The Vought cameras were dead. The public didn't know the truth yet, but the war had finally begun. The transition from Justice League icons to the world's most wanted super-terrorists took exactly 48 minutes. That was how long it took for Vought News Network to pivot from the glowing coverage of the Pine Barrens mission to a somber, black-bordered special report. As Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki huddled in the back of a windowless delivery van, the flickering light of a tablet showed Cameron Coleman's face, contorted into a mask of patriotic grief. "A dark day for the American dream," Coleman intoned, his voice trembling with a manufactured tremor. "The Justice League, the young heroes we welcomed with open arms, have been confirmed victims of a coordinated assault by the same nihilistic extremists who struck the Bronx chemical plant. Reports suggest the Green Guardian and his associates fought bravely to the end, but the sheer savagery of the attackers, aided by internal sabotage, was too much. Vought International has declared a month of mourning, and a memorial fund is being established to support the families of the victims." "Victims?" Bakugo spat, his voice sounding like gravel being ground together. He was slumped against a crate of black market ammunition, his arm in a makeshift sling provided by Frenchie. "They're burying us while we're still breathing. They're turning our names into a fucking tax-deductible donation. It's what they do," Butcher said from the driver's seat, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road of the industrial district. "They kill the person, then they sell the memory. It's cleaner that way. No lawsuits, no testimony, just a nice, tidy tragedy to boost the ratings of the next 7 special." The van pulled into a derelict shipyard in New Jersey, backing into a warehouse that looked like it hadn't seen a cargo ship since the Cold War. As the doors opened, the smell of salt and old oil hit Deku's nose, but it was quickly replaced by something he had feared he'd never see again. Midoriya, Bakugo, Tenya Ida, his class representative armor scuffed and devoid of its usual polish, rushed forward, followed by Ochako Uraraka and Tsuyu Asui. They looked gaunt, their eyes reflecting the trauma of the Sage Grove facility, but they were alive. All Might stood behind them, leaning heavily on a cane, his skeletal frame trembling with a mixture of relief and profound sorrow. "You found them," Deku whispered, his legs finally giving out. He fell into a hug from Uraraka, the weight of the last 72 hours finally crashing down on him. "Young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice a ghost of the roar that had once defined an era. I saw what they were doing in those labs. They weren't just looking for a way to get us home. They were trying to synthesize our quirks into a new strain of Compound V. They wanted to mass-produce One for All as a premium pharmaceutical. I could not allow it." "He didn't just find them," Frenchie added, stepping out of the shadows with Kimiko. "The old man blew the primary server room. He's got no power left in his tank, but he's still got plenty of fire." The reunion was short-lived. The warehouse was equipped with a dozen monitors, all of them now showing a live feed from Vought Tower. Stan Edgar was standing at a podium, looking as unshakable as a mountain. He was announcing the Vought Security Act, a piece of legislation that would grant the 7 emergency police powers to hunt down the radicals responsible for the Justice League's demise. "They're using us as the excuse to start a Supe police state," Todoroki said, his eyes fixed on the screen. He looked at his hands, the left side still blackened by the heat of the fire in the woods. "My father wanted to be number 1, but Edgar wants to be the only one." Butcher walked to the center of the group, his trench coat damp with rain. He looked at the assembled students of UA, teenagers who had been trained for a world of clear-cut heroics and public acclaim. He saw the way they looked at their tattered costumes, the way they flinched at the sound of a distant siren. "Right then," Butcher growled, his predatory grin returning. "Here's the reality check. You lot don't have a school anymore. You don't have a ranking. And as far as the public is concerned, you're dead heroes or living monsters. Vought owns the airwaves, they own the cops, and they own the man who can see through walls and laser you from a mile up." He paused, his gaze settling on Deku. "So you've got 2 choices. You can sit in this basement and hope they don't find the natural energy signatures your quirks give off, or you can join the boys. We don't have capes, we don't have merchandise, and we definitely don't have a plus ultra policy. We have one rule: we hit them until they stop moving." Deku looked at his friends. He saw the fear in Uraraka's eyes, the righteous anger in Ida's, and the cold, focused resolve in Todoroki's. Finally, he looked at Bakugo, who was staring at the Justice League logo he had ripped from his suit, now just a piece of trash on the warehouse floor. "We aren't like you, Butcher," Deku said, his voice quiet but echoing with the steel of One for All. He stepped forward, his green eyes meeting Butcher's cold blue stare. "We won't become monsters to fight monsters, but we won't stay in this basement either." Deku turned to the monitors, where Homelander was now appearing on screen, hugging a crying child at a candlelit vigil for the fallen League. The Supe looked into the camera, and for a split second, Deku saw the flicker of that narcissistic, murderous void behind the blue eyes. "We're going to dismantle Vought," Deku declared, "but we're going to do it by showing this world what a real hero looks like. We'll expose the V. We'll protect the people Vought considers collateral damage. And when Homelander comes for us, and he will, we'll be ready." "Big words for a boy in a shredded jumpsuit," Butcher mocked. But there was a flicker of something resembling respect in his eyes. "Huey, get the scanners. We need to find where Edgar moved the V0 samples. If the Justice League wants to be a resistance, they'd better get used to the smell of gunpowder." As the group began to move, setting up workstations and planning their first strike against the Vought distribution hubs, Deku walked to the edge of the shipyard, looking out at the skyline of New York. The Vought logo on the tower glowed like a malevolent star in the distance. He knew that some of his friends might not survive this. He knew that the idealism of UA was dead, buried under the cynical reality of this universe. But as he felt the sparks of One for All dancing across his knuckles, no longer the bright, hopeful green of a student, but a jagged, flickering emerald born of survival, Izuku Midoriya realized he was no longer a student. He was the first of a new kind of hero, one that didn't need a license or a brand. In a world where power breeds absolute corruption, the Justice League was finally beginning to understand the meaning of justice. It wasn't a product to be sold. It was a fight to be won. The immediate crisis of the Justice League's recruitment has ended, but the war for the soul of this universe has only shifted to the shadows. While Vought International continues to weaponize the tragedy of the MHA students' supposed deaths to push for total soup militarization, the survivors have found an uneasy, dangerous sanctuary with Billy Butcher's crew. The collision of Deku's unyielding idealism and Butcher's scorch-the-earth pragmatism has created a resistance movement unlike any Vought has ever faced. But the corporate machine is already adapting. Stan Edgar has authorized the deployment of black site assets, and Homelander, haunted by the memory of a child who didn't fear him, has become obsessed with hunting down the defects who dared to strike him. The students of Class 1A are no longer playing at being heroes. They are learning the brutal cost of accountability in a world designed to crush it. They have saved the victims of Sage Grove, but in doing so, they have painted a permanent target on their backs. The truth of Compound V is closer than ever to being exposed, but as Deku looks at the scarred faces of his friends, he knows the Plus Ultra spirit will be tested until it breaks.